Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. I am doing this video in a slightly different format than many of my other videos. And I'm doing that because there are actually some things that I want to share on screen with you, and it's a lot easier to do that using this format. So what I want to talk about is the notion that comics, modern day comics, are too expensive. And I want to dig into this issue because I've heard people say it repeatedly. And most recently, it came up in the comment section of a video that I released. And I want to spend some time kind of digging into that issue just a little bit. Anytime there are blanket statements that are made, I sometimes struggle with blanket statements because blanket statements don't leave much room for nuance. And I think in a hobby like comic books, where nuance is so important, that might be why I struggle, right? Because we know that a difference sometimes between a small tick and not having a tick has a huge impact. Having a newsstand versus a not newsstand has a dramatic effect on things. Having a 9.8 versus a 9.6 is meaningful in material. Having a comic that is a first print versus a second print, I mean, nuances and differences is what this hobby is all about, right? And so anytime someone makes a blanket statement, I struggle because blanket statements lack nuance, and people throw these things out without really kind of articulating what they're feeling. And sometimes I don't know how much time people actually spend thinking about these things before they say it. It's almost like a reflex, right? And I think that I like to go after some of those things in order to create some space for people to actually think and to ask themselves whether what is being said is actually accurate, and whether the person that is saying it actually understands what they're saying. Gives an opportunity for us to respond to people that say these things by asking a couple of clarifying and follow-up questions, right? So that we better understand. Because when people say that new comics are too expensive, I have like 1,000 questions. A 1,000 questions literally come to my mind when people make these kinds of statements, right? So comics, new comics are too expensive. Statement. First question, versus what? What are you actually comparing the prices of new comics to? So let's talk about that. Are you, and I have some things I want to share with you guys, so bear with me. Okay, so comics are too expensive. In your opinion, I get it. Versus what? What are you comparing the price of comics to? If you are comparing the price of modern day comics to comics that were sold back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you're right. Comics nowadays are absolutely more expensive. When I started collecting comics back in the day, comics were 75 cents, 125, and then 150. And then they just kind of moved up from there. And we're at about what, $4, $5 right now is where we are. In comparison to that, if I were paying 75 cents for comics or less back in the day, and I now have to pay $4 for comics, they are absolutely more expensive. I definitely get that. But what isn't? What isn't more expensive these days, right? I remember when gas was like $1.25. And I don't know if you've ever looked up the price of gas in the state of California. It is not $1.25. And it has changed over the last 40 years that I've been on this earth. The same can be said with bread and milk and the basic things that we need for life. You can say it about housing. You can say it about various forms of entertainment. The price of a movie ticket these days is nowhere near where it used to be back in the day. And I'm gonna be honest with you, when I used to go out on dates back in the day as a kid, I thought movies were too expensive then. So imagine how I feel now if I go to the movies and have to pay, what is it, $15 or something like that per ticket, Don't go to the movies and be hungry or thirsty and try to buy a thing of popcorn and a beverage and maybe some chocolate covered raisins, because I do like those. You're spending 75 bucks or so at the movies. There are very few things that have not gone up in price from the 60s, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s to the present day. There are very, very few things. And let's face it, there are people out there that are literally trying to feed their children off of comic books. And I'm not talking about local comic shop owners. I'm talking about the creators, the artists, the writers, the editors, the inkers, the colorists. All of these individuals out there are literally trying to put food on the table for their families. And they're doing it using a product that is sold for $4. Let's think about that, right? Comics are too expensive versus the 50s and 60s. Yes, they are. But versus other forms of entertainment, versus just the basic things of life, I don't think they're all that expensive. And to kind of expand upon that point, comics are not a necessity for life. They are not a necessity for life. As much as we love comics, right? As much as we enjoy them, and I have a room full of comics and other accoutrements associated with comics, they are not necessary for life. They are a form of entertainment that is purchased with discretionary funds. After all the bills and all that kind of stuff are paid, after savings has been made, it is the play money. It is discretionary money. And so I personally don't feel that $4 is too much to pay for a form of entertainment that I can enjoy for like years. I can literally enjoy the same comic book for years. And then you add to that the comic also has the potential to go up in value, potential chance to go up in value. You can't do that with a movie. If you go to the zoo, it's $20 per person. There's no residual value coming off of a zoo trip, right? Your children are entertained for a short period of time. You might be entertained for a short period of time watching the lions, tigers, and bears, but after it's over, it's done. Right? Unlike a comic, you pay $4, you pay $5 for it, you have it, you can read it over and over and over again. You can have it in your collection, and there is a chance that that comic will actually go up in value. I personally don't think that $4, $5 is too much for a new comic. There are some that I think may say that comics are too expensive because when they think about comics, they're actually thinking about the quality of the comic. And I get that too. So let's talk about it. There are people that believe that the quality of modern comics is subpar. They believe that spending $4 for a comic and having a subpar comic is a waste of money. And I completely agree. Completely agree. But the notion that all modern comics are trash is a misnomer. That is a misnomer. There are some fantastic comics that are being put out by independent publishers, Marvel, DC, Image. They are putting out some fantastic comic stuff that is not just great from a writing standpoint, but is also really good from an artistic standpoint as well. And so this idea that people say comics are too expensive, and what they're thinking about is that what I get for my money isn't worth it, because they're basically saying all modern comics are trash. I fundamentally disagree with that, because I think that there are so many fantastic comics that are being made right now. Is there a lot of trash? Absolutely. Absolutely. There are a lot of comics that are being made right now that are not very good. But here's the thing. On the other side of those people actually saying those comments, what they're really saying is that old comics are all good. Modern comics are all trash because the comics in my day were fantastic. The idea that all old comics are great is a misnomer. I have read a lot of really bad old comics. I've read a lot of really bad comics where I walk away from it and I'm like, what did I just read? What was that writer thinking about when they wrote that story? That did not make sense. What was that artist thinking when they drew that those panels and those pages in that comic book that just was so discombobulated? What were they thinking about when they did that? There is a lot of old stuff that is not good. There is a lot of old stuff that is really good. The idea that you can, again, blanket statement say everything that is new is bad and everything that is old is fantastic. You cannot do that because it lacks nuance. But that's what people want to do. And I don't think that it's fair because there is a lot on both sides that is really, really fantastic. And I would encourage people that think that all modern comics are trash. I would encourage them to do something. I would encourage them to actually read it. Actually read a modern comic. Read one. Because a lot of times people say, that they aren't good when they've never actually read a modern comic. And so I would encourage you, if people are basically making these statements, dig a little deeper. And I'm not saying, I think it's important for me to mention this. I'm not saying that these people are wrong. I'm not saying that these people are bad. I'm saying that maybe they haven't taken a step back and given thought to the things that they're saying. Sometimes you just react. But you're not actually thinking. It's just a reaction. It's just something that I've always said, so I'm just keep saying it, right? But I think if we hit the pause button, if we pump the brakes and say, well, let's talk about that. Like, what do you really mean? What do you really mean that comics are too expensive? Compared to what and in what capacity? Break it down for me. Let's have a discussion. Because what we may realize is that maybe this person has a point of view that maybe we're not appreciating, or if we create this space for this dialogue, maybe they can walk away with a different impression based upon the things that we actually say to them. And so, again, I'm not saying that any of these folks are bad people. I'm not saying that any of them are wrong. I'm simply saying that we should give them an opportunity to think about these things. So I want to do something real quick. I actually want to share some pages with you guys that I was able to go out and find. And the very first one that I actually want to show, if I can do this correctly, this is actually the real median personal income in the United States. And this kind of goes to the point that I was just making a few moments ago, that everything is getting more expensive, right? Everything is getting more expensive. But what we also have to recognize is that personal income is also going up. Your buying power may be going down, right? Because everything is getting more expensive, right? So your ability to take that money that you have and actually buy a lot more stuff, maybe that is going down. But when you just look at least this data that I was able to find, you can see this actually came from the stlouisfed.org down here in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see that the adjusted dollars, right, back in 1975 was around this, 23,000 mark or something like that, maybe 23,500. And you can see over time that the median personal income in the United States has actually gone up. A little bit of some meandering, right? But it is gone up, right? Where it's basically, it was at 23.5 and it's now at roughly 31.5. The thing is that, again, incomes, if you will, are going up, and this has been adjusted for inflation. And I think that this is an important trend that we look at, because people are making more money. And I'm using this term loosely. I am not an economist, but again, when I look at some of the data, it tells me a little something, right? And those that are much more accomplished when it comes to the economy may be able to help me out on some of this stuff. But this was a graphic that I found that I thought was a really interesting one. And I think it was important to kind of pause on this for just a moment, because, people are like, back in the day, I could take $5 and go buy all this great stuff. And, $5 doesn't buy much these days, but that's the nature of the beast. That is the nature of the beast. And it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And so there's a couple of more here that I want to actually share with you guys. Let me see. This is I think this is the one right here. This one I thought was a really cool one. This was a really cool one. And so this one is actually from the visual. You can see it up here. You can see all of it up here if you guys want to actually go to the website and all this kind of stuff. The visual capitalist, you can see all that. And this basically is a decade of grocery prices for 30 common items, right? So I thought that this would be really helpful for us to be able to look at to say, what is happening with food, right? Because comics are too expensive. Well, let's look at flour. Let's look at flour. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to find anything that basically looked from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s to present day. But this actually shows a 10-year horizon going from 2007 all the way up to 2017. And let me see if you guys can actually see that pretty well. I think so. I may be able to make it a little bit bigger. I'll take my face off of there. Or maybe that'll make it a little bit bigger. But you can see that flour has basically gone up 44%, right? That's a pound of flour was basically 36 cents, and now it's 52 cents. Basically, it's an increase of 44% over a 10-year horizon. Rice, which I actually eat a ton of. There was something crazy going on here in 2008, 2009. Rice was really expensive, but it's actually come down. But even compared to, again, 2007 to 2017, you can see here that rice has actually gone up 31%. Sugar. Everybody loves sugar, 21%. Look at pasta. Look at pasta, 45% over a 10-year horizon. My guess is that if we stretch these numbers back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the increase would be even more dramatic than what we are seeing right here. And again, this is a pound of pasta. Pound of pasta doesn't go very far, right? But we're looking at a 45% increase. White bread, 12%. Wheat bread, 16%. Milk is surprisingly something that has actually gone down by 7%. I was actually very shocked by this. And for those that are out there more in touch with these things, you guys may have some insight into why that happened. Maybe, I don't know why. Maybe milk producers have said, hey, we need to slash prices to get people to drink more milk. I don't know. I don't drink milk. I'm lactose intolerant. Salted butter has gone up 10%, cheese 11%, eggs. Oh, look at eggs. Look at where they were back in 2015. That is crazy. But eggs have actually gone down. Shocker that it has gone down. And that is actually for a dozen eggs. I wonder what liquid egg whites have done, because I actually use liquid egg whites. Neither here nor there. But you can see here, as we continue to go down this list of various fruit and things like that, you're looking at double digit, in many cases, increases, 28% for seedless grapes. I wonder what was up with that. A lot of increases, 16% for tomatoes, 45% for dried beans, 38%. I mean, the numbers go on and on and on. There's a few declines, 58% increase for bacon. All of you peanut butter eaters, 43%. I mean, this is actually some pretty interesting stuff, at least in my opinion. But the question becomes, why did I show this? I showed it because, again, people look at comics and they're too expensive. True. Things that typically involve discretionary funds tend to be expensive because it's discretionary funds. They're not the basics of life. But when you look at the basics of life, even those prices have gone up. And again, I don't know if people are thinking about this or not, but I wanted to kind of highlight some of this stuff. Very, very few things are actually getting cheaper. Coffee costs, I mean, Starbucks is what, $3 or something like that? You can actually have coffee at home for what, like 25 cents? Yet, Starbucks is a major corporation built off of beans and hot water. Everything is more expensive, my friends. All right, so let me show you another one. I think I have at least one more to go. This is a cool one, I think. This is a really cool, from the exact same source, Visual Capitalist. This is then versus now. And it basically asks the question of, what does $1 buy you, right? Because everyone's like, I used to buy all these things. Well, again, things are not as cheap as they used to be. And it doesn't matter what you talk about. Back to our coffee analogy, back in the day, and this is a little dramatic, in 1808. In 1808, I guess that's the year, right? You can buy 2 pounds. You could have bought 2 pounds of coffee. Howard Schultz could have bought 2 pounds of coffee for $1 versus now where you can get 2.7 ounces. I don't even know if you can make a really good cup of coffee off of 2.78. Oh no, it's Maxwell House. Never mind. Never mind. It's Maxwell House. It's not good coffee, but it gives you an example. Back in the day, you could literally get drunk for $1. You could get drunk for, I mean, 3 gallons of whiskey. That's a long period of getting intoxicated. Over here, 1.25 ounces. I think that's a shot. I think that's not, is that even a shot? That might be a sip. That might be a sip. And you can go down the list here. Campbell's, 10 cans versus 7.1 ounces. Steak, back in the day in 1913, right? You could have gotten a 4-pound sirloin steak versus versus a tiny amount of steak. Movie tickets you could have picked up back in 1941. 4 movie tickets for the price of $1. Now you can get a fourth of a movie theater water. A fourth of a movie theater water. McDonald's back in 1955, you could have fed a family. You could have almost fed a family. I mean, they would have each been able to get like 5 fries, but they could have had a burger, a milkshake, a pop, and some fries from McDonald's, versus now where you can only get a small fry. And I think that includes like 20 fries. But going down the list, you can see that everything has gotten more expensive. Back in the day in 1998, you could have gotten 1 gallon of gas, 1 gallon of Petro 87 grade for $1. Now you can get an air freshener. This is really cool. I enjoy the more visual things, but again, this is all designed to kind of paint the picture of this notion that it's only comics that are expensive, and you know, comics are too expensive again. Versus what? Let's peel the onion, right? We cannot just make these blanket statements, right? Because what is missing is the context, right? So what are people talking about? There's one more. Let me show this one. I thought was a little less interesting because the graphics aren't that good. You actually have to read a lot of the text, but it's actually talking about a Rubik's Cube. Back in the day, you could have picked up a Rubik's Cube in 1980 for $1.99. Now a new Rubik's Cube will cost you $20. A cell phone back in the day, they've always been expensive, in my opinion, way too expensive. I think one of my first computers was a PC and it was like $3,000. My family spent a lot of money on that PC. Homes. This is one that I fundamentally agree with. Houses are too expensive, especially if you live in the Bay Area. This thing says at the end of 2017, the average cost of a new home was $400,000. At the end of 1987, a new home cost $160,000. And if you adjust it for inflation, that house was only $289 back in the 80s. Adjusted for inflation versus $400,000 now. And what I don't know is again what size this house is, what the average home is, and all that kind of stuff. But they make the statement here: it's no wonder that people in their 20s and 30s are struggling to purchase their first homes in this day and age. And again, I think this was back in, I think this is from 2017. So Imagine what this looks like for 2020. Everything is getting more expensive. Milk, we've already talked about that. Entertainment, you could catch a movie in the cinema for about $3.50. Today, that wouldn't even cover the cost of your small popcorn. And they say that in 2017, all-time high of $8.97. And I'm guessing that that's the average price across the country. I think it's very, very different if you happen to reside in the state of California. But I thought this was a really interesting one that just kind of paints the picture again of the fact that everything is getting more expensive. So I'm going to wrap this video up. And again, I want to reiterate that this is not to say that any of those people are wrong. That's not what the point is. The point is to say that we should not be afraid to challenge people that make these blanket statements, because there is an opportunity for us to maybe learn and maybe for them to learn, right? There are some people that are probably going to disagree with me in the comment section, and I'm actually okay with that, right? What I would tell those people is don't just give the video a thumbs down, right? It's too easy to say, I don't like this video. I disagree with you, Reggie. I'm going to give you a thumbs down. How about you put up a comment in the comment section and we have a discussion? right? Maybe we'll have a discussion and maybe I'll learn something. Maybe I will better appreciate your point of view if you can make a solid argument. I will adjust my thinking. But if you put that comment there, I'm going to put some other things out there for your consideration as well, because that's what this is about. A healthy community is a community that is not afraid to have a little bit of respectful back and forth. And so I am looking forward to hearing and reading people's comments in the comment section. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so at Regie Collects on Instagram, or you can email me at Regie@regiecollects.com. Take care.